Um, our next speaker is Ryuji, Mr. Professor Ryuji Hiraoka. He has a PhD in history of science from Kyushu University, and he is now an associate professor at Prefectural University of Kumamoto, specializing in early modern Euro-Asian scientific exchange. He has recently published his first book called Textual Studies in Early Jesuit Cosmology in Japan. 南山系宇宙論。はい。こちらで販売しております。And he has also written articles such as the transmission of Western cosmology to 16th century Japan. His presentation will be on the early Jesuit cosmology in Japan from 1549 to 1870. So let's welcome Professor Ryuji.
Thank you, Chair, for your introduction. And my topic today is early Jesuit cosmology in Japan. And this date, 1549, is a very famous date for historian of Japanese Christianity, the arrival of Francis Xavier in Japan as the first missionary of Christianity. And the last date, this one, 1814, is the dates that are found in the extant manuscript copy of the Jesuit cosmology of the early period in this period. So, but at the time span of my talk will be like this. And okay. It was during the so-called Christian century when Europe first came in direct contact with Japan and the mutual cultural exchange had begun to take place. From the viewpoint of intellectual history, what makes the century intriguing and unique is that Western cosmology was first introduced to the country by the hand of the Jesuits. Above all, the treatise, this one, De Spira on the sphere, clearly shows the introduction has been done in a systematic and comprehensive way. It was composed in 1593 by a Spanish Jesuit, Pedro Gomez, to be used as a textbook by students preparing for the priesthood at the Japanese college, Jesuit college. From the very outset of the Japan mission, the Jesuits put Western cosmology in the service of evangelization. Sometimes they use it to raise people's curiosity to Western learning in general, to pave the way to their religious propagation. And other times, to criticize the Buddhist worldview, to denounce the Buddhism itself. However, Gomez's decision to compose the textbook had one clear intention, that is, to demonstrate the existence of Christian God on a logical and rational ground. In the preface of this pilot, the Gomez says, I quote, as the Apostle says, these visible things, namely the machine of the world and the perpetual immutable order of the heavens, demonstrate invisible attributes of God very clearly. Therefore, after having pursued that knowledge of God, which can be acquired by faith, now we shall also give a very brief account of the knowledge of God, which can be attained through the creatures, that is, the nature, motion, and the influence of the heavens, and the four elements and this interior world. For with regard to them, the prophet especially says that heaven declares the glory of God, As shown here, the Gomez's aim was to make the Japanese students to reach the notion of invisible God through the knowledge of these visible things in the world. And Gomez's intention became clearer when we see a fact that the Jesuits in Japan also produced a large amount of text on what is called design argument. Design argument is a classical argument in European intellectual history, which infers from the intelligent order and creative beauty of the world that there is an intelligent designer or creator of the universe. The earliest and most important example is Alexandre Varignan, about whom the Professor Nesme discussed earlier. He was responsible for all the Jesuit activities from India through to Japan. In his treatise, Catechism of the Catholic Faith, which was composed in 1586, published in this date, a concise manual of Christian doctrine written especially for Japan mission. And that includes 7 reasons why God needs to exist. The logical structure of Varignan's arguments can be divided into 4 steps. First, to propose a metaphor like tidy house or Christian-made planetarium is a kind of planetary clock, and by which, second, to indicate that every artificial thing has its maker, which is invisible, but by whose hand the visible order has been produced and kept. And the third, then he continues to argue that attract the reader's attention to the highest order and harmony shown in the natural world in which we live, such as the heavenly movement, etc. And then finally concludes that they are the best evidences of the existence of God, the Creator, who is invisible but has highest and perfect intelligence. Here, Varignan only gives a brief mention to world's order around here. But we can hardly suppose that this has nothing to do with the systematic introduction of Western cosmology, for the same arguments have been widely reproduced by later generations as well in considerable variety. It is also to be noted that Gomez himself also gave the same demonstration as Varignan in his theological treatise that was used as a textbook together with text file. What is more important, however, is that the demonstration of the God's existence by design argument was formally put at the first stage of the Jesuit conversion plan in Japan. This is a diagram I made. And as a working method to lead the initiates Japanese who would be expected to be a Christian, to lead them to baptism, the plan was officially approved by Varignan himself in 1583. And it can be epitomized into 7 sermons or steps. The first is the existence of God. That means the demonstration of the God's existence. And the second, the immortality of soul. And third, refuting Japanese religions, both creation of the world, etc., and advents and the mysteries, and 6, the last judgment, and 7, 10 commandments, etc. And viewed from this 7-phase scheme, the aggressive employment of cosmology at the preliminary stage of propagation is understandable as a device to arouse the spiritual demand which is potentially hidden among the Japanese, then to introduce people to Christian God very naturally, natural introduction. While the combination of cosmology and design argument followed by the gradual doctrines was to duly furnish the spiritual supply for that demand. In this consistent and comprehensive plan, cosmology played a key role as the spiritual weapon. And it was surely this inseparable connection with design argument that had prepared for and determined the first introduction of European natural philosophy into Japan. As I said earlier, however, the persecution of 1614 by the Tokugawa government put the end to this scheme as well as the mission itself. But Gomez-Fleet's pilot somehow survived through the persecution, as it was the origin, or at least one of the sources, of several Japanese books, the blue one, and yellow are the Latin books. And that is Nigiryakusetsu, Kenkon Bensetsu, and Nanban Ukiron. And Nigiryakusetsu, okay. Now let us move on to how these works were preserved and diffused in the coming Edo period from 70s to mid-19th century. Nigiryakusetsu. This is the first case, and whose title literally means the brief discussion on the heavens and the earth. And this book is a faithful Japanese translation of this phyla, though the Christian elements in the original have been entirely removed. It has been believed that this book was hardly circulated in the later age. But a decade ago, Japanese historian Azutaka Unno analyzed a newly found copy, Inagaki manuscript, and concluded that it was diffused much more widely than had been believed. I have also found another manuscript that throws additional light on how it was transmitted. A manuscript titled Tenmon-gata Kakitome, that literally means astronomer's note, is now preserved in Isahaya City Library, Nagasaki. And this is a compilation of 83 short passages concerning astronomical or geographical knowledge. Although almost all the passages, like this one, at the head, it was put the first that reads Totsu, Totsu, the passages like this. And almost all the passages lack information about the sources from which they are taken. But the textual comparison clearly reveals that about half of them, that means around 40, the passages are taken from Nigiryakusetsu. This is a passage from Tenmon-gata Kakitome. And on the right column is the text from Nigiryakusetsu. They are almost identical, you can see. Moreover, the other passages in Tenmon-gata Kakitome contain much information, such as Latin text and Dutch texts. So this is Latin one, and Dutch one, together with the Japanese translation, and all of which undoubtedly show the connection with what we call Langabu Dutch studies that took place in late 18th century. This is the Latin text. And although it is still not clear about the compiler of this narrative, it at least suggests that we need to expand the scope of our survey to Dutch studies, which was hitherto thought uninterrelated with the early Jesuit cosmology. Okay. Next example is the Kenkon Bensetsu and Nanban Ukiron. About this one, Kenkon Bensetsu on the heavens and the earth with critical commentaries. And below is its variant copy, the Nanban Ukiron, the Unki theory of the West. These two works have one original draft as its origin, and that original draft is attributed to the apostate Jesuit, Christopher Pereira, and he later got the Japanese name after he became an apostate, Sawano Chuan. So Pereira Chuan is the same person. So far, I have identified 17 manuscripts for the Ken condenses and 12 manuscripts for the Namban. And while the former above preserves the Chuan's original text very well, the latter has one distinctive feature. The whole text is considerably modified by the Unki theory, that is the Chinese traditional doctrine of medicine as well as of meteorology. And since the Chinese theory was very popular in 17th century Japan, the unknown editor of Namban Unkinon seemed to have understood Chuan's Western cosmological idea in terms of the Chinese medical meteorology, thus created this very unique piece of work. Here, I would like to focus on this latter work to see how it was read by later generation. First, it should be noted first that the several readers of the latter work, Namban in 18th century, explicitly argued that this book discusses the very theory of Unki, not that of West. For example, Tani Kakimori, a Confucian scholar in Tosa, nowadays Kochi, in the colophon attached to his manuscript, says, I quote, "This book is a specific version of the Unki forecasting theory, about which the school of Japanese physicians give lectures." And another example is the note written in the margin of a Hakun manuscript, different manuscript, which was made in 18th century by unknown hand. And it reads, "Why is this book entitled Unki Theory of the Namban, that is West, of which I feel dubious about the title," he says. "And I read and found it Western art of calendar making, but judging from the text on Unki theory, Chinese theory, this book looked to me to be produced by a Japanese physician who is well versed in the Chinese medical meteorological theory." So this unknown author surely noticed that this book might be of Western origin, but resulted in attributing it to a Japanese physician who was well versed in the Chinese theory. All this shows how difficult it was for later generations, especially in 18th and 19th century, to discover the true origin of this work, that is, the early Jesuit. And some of them even denied the Western origin by themselves. And here is the concluding remarks. Above, I have given several examples showing how the early traditions of Jesuit cosmology in Japan were established, preserved, and transformed. And due to the complicated nature of bibliographical study, it is still difficult for us to reach a fundamental reassessment of this process. Nonetheless, I have arrived at the following conclusion. Jesuit introduced Western cosmology in Japan's Christian century as the strategic weapon in their conversion plan. And it was especially to demonstrate their God's existence on the rational and logical ground together with the designer. And even after the persecution, the related texts have been survived and transmitted by manuscript, from which Christian elements in the original were entirely removed. And during the 18th century, some readers arrived at the conclusion that it's not of Western origin, but it's composed by a Japanese physician with good knowledge of the Chinese medical meteorological theory. And at the end of the century, the same century, we find an interesting point of contact with that studies as well. At the end, eventually, it has been diffused throughout the Edo period by such an intricate process that extends over the tradition of not only Namban, but Chinese Dutch studies. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Ryuji, for your thorough research and presentation. I would like to take a question.
I have two questions to ask you. One question. In Mariano, is there no idea of natural religion. I think Jesuits thought all people sought God by nature. But about Mariano is like this. And second, Shidoti is arrived in Japan. The cosmology of Shidoti, I think, has influenced Japanese cosmology. Is this right? According to you?
Okay. I still don't get the point. The meaning of the natural religion. What is natural?
Natural religion. Among all pieces of human pieces, six by nature, six is a God by nature. According to my thought, Francisco Xavier has introduced the idea of natural religion to consider Japanese people.
Yes, I am right.
Not design.
Yeah. I'm not sure if I'm right, but as far as I know, what you said, the concept of such things is what we call natural theology. And it is natural theology. I believe in that period, in European intellectual environment, I still don't know how much the intellectual pay much attention about the word itself, natural theology, or not. But the idea itself, you can see in the Christian century, Jesuit in Japan, were almost the same. That was later called natural theology in 18th or 19th century. And in that sense, the Mariano, not only Xavier, but the Mariano is in the same tradition to explain what is the Christian God like by explaining how the nature is like. And that's the first question.
What relations
Hiraoka, he was, I forgot, but he tried to go get into Japan in 18th century, 17th,
early
17th century, early 18th century, early 18th century, and I don't know much about himself, but he was very, at least Catholic missionary who tried to create activity again in Japan. And but soon after he arrived in Japan, he was captured and he was censored by the government at that time. But as far as I have seen the reports of his censure, the interview with the government officer, Japanese officer at the time said that his knowledge about nature world, natural world was excellent. He knows a lot of things that we don't know, but when it comes to the religion, that the Shiroji wanted to say the most was to the people. The Japanese officer, he was actually the very intellectual person, I have seen. And he said that, but about when it comes to religion, he said almost nothing, and he's almost stupid or something. So, in that sense, maybe it's not a good answer for your question, but
of Pedro Gomez's preface, Vidas de Espera. There's a striking phrase in there, the nature, motion, and influence of the heavens. I remember when I read that in your article, but I thought, oh, there may be some astrological resonance in this phrase, and then I read the rest of your article and didn't find anything else. So I was curious if you had any parallel passages that you know of, or anything that can give deeper insight into why people do so.
Yes. Thank you very much for your question. I think it's very important because I also have the same question, when I was translating this Latin into English. In his textbook, actually, I have already published one, but it is not all. Just one half, first half of that text, and I'm now working on the second half. And the second, but the first half, the part one of this textbook is about the astronomy. It does not include astrology at all. So in that sense, he is not saying the right word about his book. But in the second book, is about the interior world and the polarity that is correspond to Aristotle's meteorology. And yes, I still don't know whether it was a slip of the pen of Gomez or he had some intention to make some astrological work, or whether it was actually done or not. We have no proof or evidence such a astrological work have been done. But as I said earlier this morning, in Ken Conferences, we at least have one chapter about Western astrology. And now I'm trying to identify the Western source. I'm not sure whether I can do that myself or not. But anyway, when it comes to, we cannot judge, be certain about this, his explanation.
What's interesting in relation to Clavius, who I assume he studied with or learned from, that Clavius also talks about the importance of the effects of the heavens, but then doesn't actually discuss it.
Thank you very much for your presentation. Enjoy. I have a question about Ferreira-chan. I'd like to know if you can give us a case on this, because I'd like to know if you have more to give general approach to what was that case of apostasy and which topics he was dealing with to proclaim his apostasy. He has some kind of text.
Yes, Prisma Pereira.
Yeah.
I'm sorry that today I don't have the picture or the drawing of how he was how do you say, tortured. Yes, tortured after he was captured by the Japanese officers. But it said that he was in 1630s, I think, and before that he was a very active missionary, and he was even at a very important post of the Jesuit church in the time. But after he was caught and got some torture, and he completely lost his intention to continue as a missionary. And after that, he lived as apostate under the surveillance of a Japanese officer who was very powerful in Nagasaki at the time. And he was actually sent by the officer to the Dutch people and to understand what, for example, about medicine and cosmology and something like that. Maybe after me, the professor here will talk about it. And so what I can say now is there is a very detailed study about Christopher Pereira himself, and it was written first in English, and so I can take it and show you.
Just one question.
Perhaps as you know, in the European paradigm, the beauty of natural world was openly presented as the music of nine spheres. So, please tell me, if the Jesuit thought about it, or if not, why so? This is my question.
Thank you very much. Yes, it is true that Jesuits brought to Japan at the time not only cosmology but Western music. But I have yet to find the connection between those two. If I were Jesuit at the time, maybe I would like to. I am inclined to teach together with those two together. For example, when the Japanese initiates, when we are talking about the Western music, this is a kind of heavenly music. So if you have a very good, if you like it, it's a kind of you can listen to the God or something like that. But for the time being, unfortunately, I have not found any texture or some evidence about that links the two different fields together so far. But I thank you very much for your yes, question.
Okay, this year, so thank you very much, Dr.